talking about diminishing and the sort of erasure, which is a very popular term that's used, erasure of past suffering, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What do you make of the Haris-Walz's campaign around the groups, the struggling groups that they're trying to bring into their camp and the ones that they've missed off?
Well, I find it interesting that this election, which was, I think, supposed to be about women's issues, and now we have a woman at the top of the ticket on the Dem side, has actually become, in some ways, a bit of a contest about men and masculinity. And that's partly because you see this gap opening up in voting intentions, at least among young Americans, especially with young women being much more likely to be on the left now and young men, if anything, somewhat moving to the right. So it's become something that people are really talking about a lot, like what's happening with men. And then, of course, because of the way that the Republican Party has really lent quite hard into lots of kind of men's spaces and also just a certain affect, right? In some ways, the data point I like best on that is that in 2016, Donald Trump was introduced at the RNC by Ivanka Trump. In 2020, he was introduced by Ivanka Trump. In 2024, he was introduced by Dana
White.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was Dana White or Hulk Hogan.
No, Hulk Hogan came on later, but like Dana White. And so like, okay, so from Ivanka Trump, right? And so that's not subtle, right? That's a kind of clear bid, I think, to be the quotes men's party. Whereas the Haris-Walz campaign are betting very hard on winning off with women's votes, not least since Dobbs, reproductive rights being a huge part of the agenda. But what's interesting is they're not really playing up at all, correctly in my view, Harris as the first female president, glass ceiling, etc. They're kind of downplaying that. And in Tim Walz, there's an interesting figure there, high school teacher. If he becomes a VP, in fact, I think even running for VP, first career public school teacher to do so.
Wow.
We've had 27 lawyers as president of the United States, and I've got no idea how many vice presidents, but let's assume double that, right? Yeah. Let's assume we've had 50 lawyers as president or vice president. We haven't had a single career public school teacher, so he would be the first to do that. But he was also a coach.
Great relationship with his son. That video of his son. So, I mean, Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad from Lotus Eaters, somebody who is not exactly a massive fan of the Democrat Party, as far as I can tell, defended that video of his son crying and said, anybody that thinks that this is cringe or worthy of critique, this is precisely the sort of masculinity that you want. Yeah. Like a son, an adult son, bawling his eyes out at his dad, reaching.
Proud at his dad. Oh my God.
Awesome.
And I got to tell you, like as the father of 3 sons, I have yet to have any of them in tears in the audience, at least not deliberately, but there is something about, like, of course sons want their dads to be proud of them. But the thing we don't say as much is, I really want them to be proud of me.
Yeah.
And when they are proud of me and they'll say something about that, it's a thing. Yeah. And so like I agree. Anybody that saw that and was unmoved by it, something wrong with them. But I would also say that the Democrats actually haven't articulated a kind of pro-male agenda in a way that they now really could. I think they've dropped some of the kind of, they're not really leaning on a very strongly first woman president thing. You don't hear them talk about toxic masculinity or the patriarchy.
You don't hear them talk that much about her minority status either. No, I think that's got to be a strategic thing. Because coming into this, I would have expected it. Hillary Clinton, they definitely did try and go with that.
With Hillary, they did. And then, in Hillary, the bumper sticker was like, I'm with her. Yeah. That's all you had. And so they're not doing that, and they're trying to
counter-sig.
Yeah, but then, even though I think there's a lot of substance to like the things they're doing, which actually would be quite good for boys and men, they don't seize the political capital around it. So the political terrain for being pro-men without being anti-women seems to be still terrain that neither party is able to kind of occupy. For the Republicans feel unable to be able to articulate in a way that's really resonant the issues of boys and men without coming across as somehow wanting to turn back the clock on women. Meanwhile, the Democrats, who I think have had some really good policies for men, can't talk about it. And I'll just say, I'll take an example of something that the reason I'm hesitant about this is it risks sounding really trivial, but I think it speaks to something deeper. So the Haris-Walz campaign just put out their opportunity economy paper, which talks a lot about jobs and inflation, all the stuff you'd want them to, not about identity. It has 7 images of the candidates interacting with a voter. In those 7 images, guess which demographic doesn't appear once? No men. not a single man. And you've got to think that couldn't have happened the other way around. And I've got to think that someone up there has a blind spot that you would produce a publication which doesn't feature a single male vote, a single man out of all the 7, right? Just one out of 7, right? And so I don't think that was intentional, but I do think it was indicative of just a mindset issue here, which is that there's one picture in a warehouse with hard hats, and probably someone went, "Oh, we better make sure that's a woman." It's actually a pregnant woman, right? So it's like,
oh my God,
really, like, so it's like, and you could see that, like, we want to make absolutely sure that people don't think that factory jobs are just for men. So let's make sure that's a woman. But then all the others are women as well. I mean, look, I don't like talking about that kind of stuff because I think it sounds silly and trivial, and like, why is he talking about pictures in a publication when he runs a think tank? But the answer is because I think representation matters.
Yeah.
And I think if political parties want people to feel like they see them, they should show them.
Well, if we look at it is really funny. Someone brought this up the other day. A lot of criticism around Kamala Harris going on Call Her Daddy, very sort of female-focused podcast, biggest female podcast in the world, female Joe Rogan, and basically saying, well, look, what are you going in there for? How many Call Her Daddy watchers do you think were like, oh, I was going to vote for Trump, but now that I've seen Kamala Harris on Call Her Daddy, it's really going to change.
Is it quite liberal? I
mean, it is. It's I would say pretty liberal. It's like Hollywood, so whatever that is, which is probably pretty liberal. Okay. But I mean, the primary talking point on that was women's bodies and abortion.
You think she was preaching to the choir there? Right?
I mean, absolutely. But then on the flip side of that, like Trump going on Andrew Schultz's show, Theo Von's show, Sean Ryan's show. I would guess Sean Ryan has maybe 98%. It's a sort of military veteran podcast, 5-hour episodes about the Battle of Fallujah and stuff like that. It's like not a massive, like the most Trump like cohort that you could think of. So it kind of got me thinking, because they're not stupid. The people that run these campaigns aren't stupid. And so I wonder what they're doing. I wonder whether they're going on so that they have a warm audience and a warm host who is forgiving and largely on their side, so that it's just a good press opportunity and they can tick the box of, I did unscripted interview. I'm wondering whether or not they actually genuinely feel like they need to shore up this base. I'm wondering whether or not they think that if they tried to do it in the other direction, that it would just have no impact and there's the potential for them to come across as being silly. So I'm like really trying to sort of, this is my world, right? I'm thinking, right, okay, what would happen? You know who I really wanted to bring on the show? I really wanted to bring the 2 VPs on. I really wanted to have separately. Yeah. I really wanted to speak to them separately. I thought that
would be interesting.
JD and Tim would have just been like, in some ways, actually more interesting than the 2 people that were leading, because their debate was way better.
And certainly on this question about the role of men in society. I mean, they're both very interested in it. And
JD broke the whatever it was called, the beard ceiling. Did you see this?
I did.
Yeah. So this was one of the clips.
That means you could run.
I could
be president, right? Because you're British.
I couldn't. Joe Rogan and Cameron Hanes said they'd vote for me if I did run for president, though. So this is Scott Galloway on Ryan Holiday's podcast recently. This should make sound if I play it.
I think the election is going to be decided by masculinity. What do I mean by that? The voters that are kind of up for grabs right now are not young women. They're going Harris. It's not old people. Yeah. Old men. They're going Trump. Young men aren't really going towards the Republican Party, as a lot of people would say, or the manosphere. Young men actually are supportive of gender rights, any demographic. What they're doing is they're moving away from the Democratic Party because they don't feel seen. On the DNC site, there's an explicit section that says who we serve, and it lists 16 different demographic groups, from people of faith to immigrants to Asians, Pacific Islanders, blacks, women, disabled, veterans. I tried to calculate it. My best estimate is it covers 76% of the population. They have the same issue that universities have, or the DEI apparatus has at university. When you are explicitly advocating and favoring 76% of the population, you're not advocating for them, you're discriminating against the 24%. So unfortunately, these individuals feel shunned by what I'll call more progressive or the establishment. They're very drawn to anyone who feels their pain. And unfortunately, that void has been filled by some very negative voices.
What do you make of that?
Well, the example of like who we serve from the DNC site, which does list all those demographics, but not men, is kind of on the nose. And I actually think that you had Dan Cox on.
I did.
Right? And Dan, I think, was the person who actually first identified that.
He's great.
And we've all been picking it up kind of since. And again, it's a bit like my example of the opportunity economy PDF. Like, not very many people are actually going to those places and noticing that thing. But I do think it's indicative of a problem that the Democrats have, and that the center-left generally has, and that center-left institutions have, with just acknowledging these problems, like getting the CDC to admit that there's a gender gap in suicide. It's like banging your head against a wall. It's like, but you know, there is a fourfold difference, right? You bang, bang, or they won't. And so that has created a vacuum, because if there are real problems and they're not being acknowledged, then of course someone's then going to come in and say, yes, you're struggling. The question is, whose fault is that, and what do we do about it? So I do think there's a lot of ground being left open here, particularly on the center-left, by their failure to acknowledge that these problems are real. What's interesting about this is that when you actually kind of turn to areas of policy, you actually find that there's probably more policy energy around some of these things on the center-left than there is on the center-right, right? And so my favorite example of this is the infrastructure bill. Have we talked about this? Probably not.
No.
Probably hadn't happened. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill, you know, creating millions of jobs in construction, transit, and some in manufacturing, etc. 2/3 of those jobs are going to to men. We know that because a very good women's think tank did the analysis, showing that because those occupations skew male, there is going to men. And challenged on that, the Democrats just apologize for it or run away from it. So, you know, there's a clip of Pete Buttigieg being asked about Joy Reid, and Buttigieg is a consummate political communicator. And so watching him struggle was, you know, that was worth a watch in it of itself. This is just a bill for white men, isn't it? And what he should have said was, well, it's a bill that will help working class men, but actually it will help black and Hispanic men at least as much as white men, Joy. And you know what? Given the recent economic trends, I actually don't think helping working class men is necessarily a bad thing. Isn't that maybe a good thing, given what's happened to working class men? By the way, we're also doing these other things for kind of women, but why do you think that a piece of legislation that's helping working class men of all races is a bad thing? Like, he didn't say that. He said, well, we're working on that, and we're trying to get more women into them, and it's all a bit difficult, and everyone uses bridges. So it's like it's an unusually bad interview from Buttigieg, because he's just like,
deer in headlights.
Meanwhile, Josh Hawley, who is the tribune of the working man, by his reckoning, voted against the infrastructure bill, which is the only major piece of legislation that actually has been directly going to help working class men that we've seen for probably decades. And so on the one hand, you've got a party that's actually doing some stuff to help working class men, but my God, trying to get them to admit it. Oh my God, they'd never admit it. Yeah. And then you've got another group over here who say, we're for the working man. But well, in that case, why did you vote against infrastructure investment, which creates jobs for working men?
Why do you think they did?
Hawley would say it's because there were like conditions attached to the investments, which he would say were the part of the woke agenda, etc. And I don't want to say that his arguments against it were entirely without merit, but nonetheless, here you've got this bill. It's for the working guy, right? Above all. And one side won't take credit for it and the other side won't support.
Isn't it funny? In other news, this episode is brought to you by Function. You probably want to know what's happening inside of your body, but getting your blood work comprehensively analyzed can cost thousands, which is why I've partnered with Function, because for just $500, you can receive extensive lab work on over 100 carefully selected biomarkers, giving you an insight into your hormone profile, cardiovascular health, organ function, and much more. They've got a team of expert physicians that'll analyze the data and then give you actionable advice to improve your health and lifespan. Monitoring things like your testosterone can make a massive difference to your energy, performance, and happiness. And being able to see that data charted out over the course of a year with actionable insights to improve them is precisely what you get with Function. They've got a 300,000 person waitlist. Boo. But every Monday, they open a few spots for Modern Wisdom listeners. Yay. Right now, you can get the exact same blood work panel that I get by going to the link in the description below or heading to functionhealth.com/modern wisdom. That's functionhealth.com/modern wisdom. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip with Richard, you will love the full-length 3-hour-long conversation, which is available just here, if you press it.